Welcome to the Surrendering Like Sarah podcast. We're your hosts, Megan Baer
and Brooke, Avon. Surrendering to God's calling for life can be hard to do, especially as the wife of a medical student, resident, fellow, or attending.
Sarah's example of surrender in Genesis 12 shows how fruitful our lives can be when we choose to let go and obey God's call.
Join us as we interview women in medical marriages striving to surrender like Sarah. We are so glad you're here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Surrendering Like Sarah podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Megan, and we are so excited to share part 2 of Jackie Nave's story today. Last week, we released part 1, and so if you missed that, we encourage you to go back and listen to that first before you listen to the second part of her story. In part 1, Jackie walks us through what it was like for her husband to be in residency while she made the decision to either keep working or stay at home to be with her son, Noah. Then she walks us through an incredibly difficult and traumatic season of her life where she experienced the stillborn birth of her second son, Bowden. If you missed part 1, again, we encourage you to go back and listen because God's testimony is so clear throughout the entire story that she shares, even in the midst of deep loss. She has an amazing way with words, and we're excited to see how her story encourages you. However, we know that talking about and listening to stories of something that is so raw as stillborn birth may not be the best decision for everyone in the season of life that they're currently in. So make that decision at your own discretion. And then part 2 today, she talks about the beautiful miracle of her third baby girl and how God is also so present in that part of her story. So we're so excited to share this with you today. Welcome back to part 2 with Jackie Nave. So kind of going off of that, you said you were able to see ultrasounds weekly of this new baby, and you were able to have this peace of mind getting to watch this baby grow and seeing the heartbeat just confirmed week after week. But what was it like still? I know that there's probably still like the devil likes to jump on and prowl on those thoughts and the fear that we have. What was it like for you to have that fear juxtaposed with the joy of this new baby and then wrestling with it in light of the gospel and in light of God's word?
Yeah, it was definitely a tricky time. I do feel like, though, before I got pregnant, God really prepared my heart for this by showing me how faithful He was, and I could trust Him. I could trust God. And that's not to say I was not in a place where I could say, yes, I'm 100% holding this baby and because God told me, but I could trust that God loved me and God was going to bring good out of whatever was going to come with this pregnancy. I wish I could say my faith was so strong. I was just going to be like, yep, I'm having this baby. We're not losing this baby. But I wasn't there, and,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I just every single day would, pray to God to protect this baby. And I also I made a very intentional decision to really choose joy every single day I got to be the mother of this baby. So every single day I woke up and I was still pregnant, I was just very excited and happy and thankful. And chose not to what if we lose the baby? What if a week from now I lose the baby? What if I lose the baby in 2 months? What if I lose the baby at 34 weeks? I just chose not to play that game and instead just choose joy every single day and thank God every single day for another day to be this baby's mom. But more specifically, the scriptures that really helped me. This is actually one that Noah and I are memorizing right now in homeschool. But Isaiah 41:10, don't be afraid, for I am with you. That was just a good one for me to kind of cling to. And then Philippians 4:6-8, I already brought that up earlier, but that when I was working and trying to decide to be a stay-at-home mom, but that really helped me a lot just to give my anxieties to God. And then I just always have loved Psalm 46:1-2, just God is my refuge. And so those were the three I feel like I really just kind of clung to a lot. And it was kind of in waves, I would say, throughout the pregnancy. I would have some some weeks where I felt like really at ease about it, and some weeks where I got a little more nervous, but through it all, God had me and he was carrying me through it, and I never felt alone. I knew he was going to be there no matter what happened.
Will you walk us through the medical complications that arose during Isla's pregnancy and what a miracle her birth truly was?
Yes. So this is where things really took a turn. So I actually didn't mention this, but before the very beginning of Isla's pregnancy, after the fertility clinic let me look at her every single week on ultrasound, at around 10 to 12 weeks, they release you, quote unquote, to your regular OBGYN. So once they released me, I went to the same OB clinic that we lost Bowden at, but I switched doctors and it was totally a God thing. She's amazing. The doctor that I was able to work with, she saw me through the entire pregnancy and was just incredible. And she set me up with the chief of MFM, so the chief of maternal fetal medicine at Penn State, truly for peace of mind. She was like, I just want to make sure that we are not missing a thing because Bowden's death was so random and rare. She just wanted to make sure there was nothing we could do to prevent this from happening again because there it's not like I could have gone on a medication or I could have had a different test done to prevent it. There was nothing they could have done to prevent his death. And so she just wanted to make sure we weren't missing something. So the chief of MFM went through my whole history, truly dug deep, and she was wonderful. And at the end of our consultation, she said, "You are so healthy. You are the perfect patient. You know, I can't see anything going wrong. Like, this is a low risk pregnancy, but because of your recent stillbirth, we're going to provide you extra prenatal care, but it's only for maternal peace of mind. It's not because it's a high risk pregnancy." So went ahead with my normal prenatal care. But then towards the end of the pregnancy, I started going in twice a week for a non-stress test, and they'd also look on ultrasound just to make sure everything's okay. Again, for truly peace of mind. Like, God put an incredible medical team around me with Isla's pregnancy. Everyone was so kind. And basically, they just told me, they said, there's no way to be after a stillbirth, and there's no way to be after a pregnancy so close to to a stillbirth. So you ask us what you need and we will provide it. And I felt like that was God being really gracious by giving me such a compassionate medical team. And I can't remember exactly where I was in the pregnancy for this. It was a little bit of a blur, but I want to say it was like 31, 32 weeks pregnant. Brooke was watching Noah. So I went in for my non-stress test, and then I went in and then they would look on her in ultrasounds just to make sure everything was okay. And she passed her non-stress test, which is really good, indicates that her heart is strong. And then I was waiting forever for the ultrasound. I texted Brooke and I was like, "Hey, it's taking a long time, but baby looks great." Well, one of the maternal fetal medicine doctors came in, and I immediately knew that was not good because usually the doctors don't pop in for these. And she told me there's a mass on my placenta that she had been looking at for 30 minutes and had consulted 3 other doctors, and nobody knew what the mass was. Nobody could figure out what the mass was. And everyone was shocked because this is a low risk pregnancy. I'm a very healthy patient and nobody knows what it is. And we're at a medical center that sees a lot. So for nobody to know what this mass is kind of scary. And what they could only decipher was it's most likely a blood clot. And what's scary about that is because Bowden most likely died from a blood clot in the umbilical cord. And I don't have any clotting disorders or risk factors for that. So she came in and she was like, I remember it vividly. She said, "I have been sitting here not sure how to tell you that there is a mass on your placenta that's most likely a blood clot and you're at a higher risk for stillbirth knowing what you just went through." And I was alone, because my husband's in the OR, and I didn't cry, but I just kind of took it and I was like, "Okay." Okay. And I was like, "Well, what do we do? Like, what do we do from here?" And we just talked about some things I needed to be really vigilant about. And she said, "I don't know how you're doing this. I don't know how you're so strong right now." And this has kind of been like my tagline, I feel like, the past year. I said, "Well, it's not my strength. What you're saying is the strength of God." And cannot tell you how many times I've said something along those lines since we've lost Bowden. And again, it's just how God has used Bowden's life. Like, it's given me so many opportunities to just talk about God's strength or Jesus. And so, and now did I want to in that moment? I was like kind of shocked and fearful, but also I was like, but I love you, God, and I know you're the reason that got me through Bowden's, the grief of Bowden. You're going to get me through this. So I recognized the opportunity and I took it and I talked about God's strength. And I don't know, like what that conversation, how that impacted that doctor's life, but I feel like in that moment, it was pretty impactful the way she looked at me after. So anyway, got that news and was pretty much told it's not near her umbilical cord. So Isla's not going to go quickly. I hate to use that word. I'm sorry. If it starts to become a problem, Isla's not going to die quickly like Bowden did, to put it simply. It's going to be she's going to start having like more decreased movement. It's going to happen over a longer period of time. So essentially, I was asked to be very, very mindful of her movements. And if I'm nervous at all, go straight to labor and delivery, which is difficult because the whole year, I mean, or not year, but since I lost Bowden, I had been in therapy with a Christian counselor, which is amazing. And then once I got pregnant with Isla, her and I worked really hard not to become obsessive over movement because that could be very toxic. So we worked really hard not to become obsessive. And now I have to be obsessive to save her life potentially. So that was challenging. So anyway, I got the news and I remember I texted Brooke and I was pretty upset. And I was like, I need a little bit of time because I felt in a weird way that I might have just gotten a death sentence from my third child. And I was like, why God? Why? You know, and actually, I don't know, Brooke, you know this. I left the OB, went to my car, and I took a little bit of time to get to your house. I actually drove across the street, got flowers for our friend who just had a baby, dropped flowers off at her house. And I'm not going to lie, in my head, I was just thinking, so her baby lived. She's coming home from the hospital today. Her baby lived and might not live. And that was a hard thing for me to like deal with. I felt like I was almost back at when we lost Bowden. So anyway, got to Brooke's house and I don't know if I think I cried. I don't remember. It was kind of a blur.
You did.
But
It's okay.
we were all, I think all of us were like shook, just kind of
Yeah.
like, okay, like here we are. But after the initial shock, I just prayed and prayed and prayed and that we would hold this baby and she'd be okay. And so that was on a Friday. And then I believe, and I wish I knew the dates, but truly this time period was like a whirlwind for me. I believe it was about 10 days before she was born. So within that time period, I had a couple other appointments and the mass it was not growing, it was not changing. So that was really good. And I was really mindful of her movements at that point. I had really knew her movements well. And then nobody knows this. I haven't told anybody this except for Brandon. The last Sunday I went to church in person, and it was right around Christmas time. So because Isla was born on Christmas Eve. So this is I I want to say the Sunday before, but I can't remember. Our church played this song and it was called Heaven's All Around. And our church usually play songs frequently. They'll rotate them in and out. I had never heard this one, and I haven't heard them play it since. So that's the interesting thing about it. And the chorus is something along the lines of heaven's all around, Jesus is near. And I just started weeping. And I remember I just was begging God that she would live, begging God that Isla would live. Like that. I don't know how else to describe it. Weeping in the middle of this humongous church, just begging that Isla would live. And like trying my best to hold it together, but not. This old, sweet soul woman was right next to me. She's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh no." But I don't know how to describe this. And then I've told Brandon this, and he's like, "I don't know how I feel about that, but it's what happened." I knew something was going to happen. That's the kind of the scary part. I felt the Holy Spirit saying,
Mm.
something's going to happen. I don't know what, but God's good. I don't really know how to describe it other than that. Like, it was just truly a very emotional moment for me, begging for God for my daughter to live, also feeling him tell me something's going to happen. And I haven't told anybody that because I don't know. It is what it is. And my husband, when I told him that, he said, I don't know how I feel about that. I was like, I don't know how I feel about that either. That happened. And that was the last Sunday I went in church. I was in church in person. And then a few days, I think that was a Sunday. So December 23rd, so Christmas Eve, if you will, we went to Hershey Hotel here. We had our like Christmas Eve dinner. My parents were in town. We had dinner, and then that night we all went to bed kind of late. And in the middle of the night, I woke up a couple times with like this pain that I really couldn't describe other than like bladder pain. I don't know how else to describe. And if you've ever been in third trimester pregnancy, like, like bladder pain is kind of common. Like, you have to pee all the time. Babies are bouncing on your bladder. And at this point, I was 33 weeks and 3 days pregnant. So I was, third trimester, but I wasn't at the tail end. I was a little anxious because 34 weeks is when we lost Bowden. So and with everything happening with Isla's placenta, I was a little nervous, obviously. And so I woke up, I was sleeping, I think around 2 a.m. I felt this pain and it woke me up out of my sleep. And I was like, well, that was weird. And I went back to sleep and I felt it again about an hour later. And I was like, well, this is really weird. And the third time I woke up my husband and I was like, something's up. And the pain was like, it was not going away. I knew it wasn't labor contractions because I've had a baby before. I've had, 2 babies before. So I knew that. I knew it wasn't Braxton Hicks because they were so uncomfortable. Called labor and delivery. And basically they were like, get here now. So we got in right after 7 a.m. And, because all of our spouses are in the medical world, we know that 7 a.m. is shift change. So it's like the worst time to go to the hospital. So we get there, it's like 7:05. Everyone's still like rounding out. And I'm like, I'm in so much pain. On the way to the hospital, I noticed Isla's movements had really slowed down. So I was terrified. So I was in the waiting area and I really was terrified. And I have to tell you, I haven't mentioned this part, but all of my nurses I've had have been incredible. Actually, Noah's labor and delivery nurse, I was texting her like right before this. So I've bonded with all my labor and delivery nurses. I haven't even talked about it, but shout out to Molly. She's amazing. And then Melissa was my labor and delivery nurse for Bowden, and her and I have also kept in touch and was truly just an angel. Like, God put her in my life to help me get through the hardest moment. But this labor and delivery nurse was Courtney, and she was also wonderful. My time with her was short, but she was amazing. She looked at my history and knew immediately I needed to hear Isla's heartbeat. She didn't. There's some things they need to usually do to triage you in, and she like bypassed all that, just took me straight in. Let me hear her heartbeat.
Wow.
She was crying. I was crying. Like, we were all crying because she knew my history, and she was like, we are just going to make sure that she's there. So she started intaking me and doing all the things. And while we were there, I don't want to get too graphic, but things started to take like a turn for the worse. And we started to know like something is going on more than just some, casual bladder pain. And I could tell at that point, I was starting to have, the pain was really picking up. And in come six doctors walk into the room. And that's when I was like, okay. And my husband was with me this whole time. And he's in his head, he's like, okay, so this is bad. Like, he knew medically, right? And they were able to decipher pretty quickly that I was dilated, so my body was in labor. They were trying to find Isla on the ultrasound and they couldn't figure out where she was. And now we know the reason they couldn't figure, or I think they were trying to be calm about it in the moment. And Brandon also was trying to be calm about it. And I was like, what's going on? But like, everybody knew like something ain't right because the baby's just free floating. So what we know now is my uterus had ruptured, or it was at least starting to rupture. And so they knew just things were not good. And what we know now is my placenta has started to abrupt in the middle of the night. That was the pain I was feeling that woke me up. And then my body tricked in an effort to save Isla, because when your placenta abrupts, usually results in stillbirth. in an effort to save her, my body labored down so hard that my uterus ruptured along my previous incision with Noah, which is why I said a C-section with Noah would come back later. So all three of those things were occurring at the same time, which is super rare. For a placenta to abrupt sporadically is like extremely rare. Usually it's due to like a traumatic event, like a car crash or something. And then for your uterus to rupture also is truly rare. So the doctor said, okay, like they didn't know all these things were happening in the moment, but they knew something was going on. And they said, you need to have your baby today. And I was in my head, like 33 weeks, 3 days, like, oh my gosh. And so I actually asked them just to let my doctor know. She wasn't working. It was Christmas Eve. I knew she wasn't working. I just said, can you just let her know? Like, I just wanted her to know. And she showed up at the hospital like 15 minutes later. She got out of bed, just left her husband and her little boy and just like showed up at the hospital and did my C-section. And she's truly an incredible doctor, very confident, she's very good. And I feel like she was God sent. Like if she was not there, I don't know if things would have ended the way they did because she's very confident in what she does and she's very good at what she does. But after they were able to get Isla out, I did see her and I heard her. The first thing I said is, she alive? I was nervous. And thankfully the NICU nurse practitioner, she knew my history and she like knew I needed to see Isla. So she made sure I saw her before she went up to the NICU. They put a mask on her because she was born so early. She needed CPAP and she went up to the NICU. And so Brandon didn't know what to do. He's like, do I stay with you? You just had an emergency section, or do I go with our baby? I was like, you go with the baby. Like, I'm okay. So he went upstairs with her to the NICU. And so it was just me and our doctor in the OR, and her and I are very close rapport. It's a little different than I think the typical patient-doctor relationship. I didn't mention that her husband works with Brandon. So that's like another layer to all of this. But she told me, she was like, you made the best decision to come here, because if you didn't, and we were minutes later, we could be looking at a very different situation. We could have lost her, or she could have had severe brain damage. We were, minutes from losing her. And Isla's perfectly healthy. That's the most incredible thing. Everybody in the OR was just saying, this is a Christmas miracle, because for placenta to abrupt, have no issues. And then for my uterus to rupture, and I didn't need a blood transfusion. That's very rare too. I had minimal blood loss. It's incredible. Like those two things don't normally happen. And for it all to happen at the same time is just, God is still in the miracle business. Like he still is. I still am processing this part of my story because it still feels very recent. But the fact that Isla didn't die is truly, it's a miracle. There's really no other way to describe it. I was making dinner today and I was baby wearing her, and I was thinking, gosh, like you are a miracle, like from God. Like the fact that you are here is incredible. So
Praise God.
Yes.
And Isla's name means devoted to God, correct?
yes, it does. Yeah.
This is so beautiful. And bring on the second wave of tears,
Yep.
remembering that text that you sent us and the picture. Oh, just sweet joy. And that's less than a year since we had found out about Bowden and mourned his loss. And just an incredible story. Incredible. There are no words to explain just how amazing the Lord worked in your story. And there's so much that you lived through then with the NICU afterwards too, because that was a long time. Will you tell us how long she was there and what that was like, how your kind of thought process changed from like, we need to get out of the NICU ASAP to how can this time be used fruitfully? Will you walk us through that too?
Yeah. So I will be honest, this was difficult for me. This was difficult, but it was because it was almost like Groundhog Day. So we had this baby, right? We had this baby. And if you're not familiar with the NICU, it's a very difficult journey, but it happens so fast. It's a fast and furious journey. And I really didn't know much about it before experiencing it myself. And God is so cool because since becoming a NICU mom, I have met like 10 NICU moms just who are further along the journey. So we had Isla and she went straight to the NICU. And since I had a C-section, I couldn't go up to go see her. I had to wait till I was able to get wheelchaired up there. And it was hard for me to see her on CPAP, which is like the mask thing that helps babies breathe and all her wires and stuff. But I was so thankful that she had the opportunity to fight for her life because Bowden didn't have that. And I had that conversation with so many nurses the first like 2 days, I would say, because I was admitted for at least I think 3 days. And because I had the C-section, so the way the hospital is at, NICU's on the very top floor, labor and delivery is right underneath it. So I was just kind of popping up and down constantly. I would just come downstairs if I needed my medications, and they would often like have to call up to the NICU to come me to like come back down. They had to check my vital signs because I was still a patient and I was like hanging out with my baby, and they were so great. Everyone was wonderful. But I just would have so many conversations with the NICU nurses about how I was so thankful that she had the opportunity to fight for her life because Bowden didn't have that. And it was scary. The first, I would say 2 days were really hard. We weren't really sure if she was going to make it because her lungs were a little more premature than they thought they were. And we had to make the decision to give her this medication called surfactant. And it goes into her lungs and it kind of helps them kind of get them a kickstart. And you have to do it, I think, within the first 48 hours of life. I think you have to make that decision. And if not, you lose that window. But there's some risks associated with that procedure. They actually said you can stay if you want, but it's really difficult for parents to watch. So we recommend you not be here. And so thankfully, having a husband that is a doctor, I let Brandon make a lot of the medical decisions for our family that are a little more difficult. I do like the well checks for the pediatrician and things like that. But anything that's a little more risky, I fully trust my husband's opinion and judgment. And I think that he is very wise, and I'm very grateful that he is my husband and I'm able just to lean on him from that medical perspective. So he made the decision like, yes, she needs this. The pros outweigh the risks here. So after the first 2 days, Isla stabilized. And at that point, I was like, okay, I can breathe a little bit because she can breathe now because her lungs are working. So we had that conversation quite a bit with the nurses. And I'd say the first week or two, it was more like, okay, like, when are we going to get out of here? So the NICU journey typically for preemies is like, make sure their lungs, they can breathe, they can go on room air, make sure they can regulate their body temperature, then make sure they can eat by mouth. Like that's like the three things you have to do. And the eating by mouth is like the hardest thing for them to do and the most boring thing for them to learn to do. Some will do it within a couple of days. Some will take weeks. Isla took weeks and I did not want her to take weeks. And it was truly like Groundhog Day. So I was pumping around the clock to provide her breast milk because it's one of the only things that really has been proven to help babies in the NICU. Besides skin to skin, those are the two things that like really help preemies in the NICU. And that's the only thing that mommy can provide. So those are the things I was doing. So I was pumping around the clock to provide her breast milk. I'd go in the mornings and stay with her for the first half of the day. I'd come home. I'd spend my afternoons with Noah. My parents essentially lived with us for like 2 months to help us get through this because my husband was still working. He didn't take leave until Isla came home. So it was a Groundhog Day, like every single day. I just was pumping every 2 to 3 hours and I was going to the NICU and then I was coming home and trying to parent Noah and doing it again on no sleep. And after like first week and a half, I was like, okay, God, why am I here? What are we going to do productive while we're here? Like every day Isla's not really taking anything by mouth. She's just sitting and growing and not taking her bottle. So what can I do while I'm here? And so I started bringing my Bible study journal with me. So nurses would see that. And we got to openly talk about Jesus and what I was studying. And I started streaming church because I went every single day. So I went on Sundays too. I could not see my baby. So I went on Sundays too, and I'd stream church from her little NICU corner. I'd hold Isla and do skin to skin, and we would just worship God together, and the nurses would see. And sometimes they ask about what I was watching, sometimes they didn't. And I would like put in the chat, like, hi from the NICU. And it was just like our little thing we did. And got to just openly talk about, I shared often about Bowden with the nurses because I had this perspective that I don't feel like a lot of the other moms had. because I was so grateful Isla was alive. And I just shared that, like, I was grateful she was here because she was alive, and how Bowden didn't have that opportunity. And I would share with the NICU nurses, and then we would talk about heaven and Jesus. And I was able to pray for a lot of the babies. So even though Isla was in the NICU she ended up being in the NICU for 34 days, she was one of the healthier babies. She just took a long time to learn to eat. But there were babies there that were super sick, and she wasn't one of them. And that also gave me perspective. So I would just pray. I would just pray for the babies that were having surgery. I'd pray for the babies that had more serious conditions. And one baby in particular, the way the NICU is set up is some of the rooms, if you have a healthier baby, quote unquote, there's like 6 babies to a bay, and there's just curtains. So you hear everybody's rounding and stuff, and you're trying to be courteous, but you know what's going on. And actually, what was lovely is I've made a lot of mom friends that way. Like, we're still friends on social media. My friend's baby's name is Alina, and we were in the same for like 3 weeks. We were in the same room, and every single day we'd see each other. And I remember when I first got there, I was like, shoot, I asked how long she'd been there. She's like, a month. And I was like, I could never do that. And then I was there for a month, and she messaged me and she was like, you did it. And so, but I would pray for her baby, and she'd pray for my baby. And then there was this baby next to us who was really, really, really sick, very, very sick. And she had a surgery that did not go well, and she almost died. And I remember I texted our little our family. I texted her, feels like a family. I texted our group chat of Christian mama friends, and everyone just prayed for this little baby. So I don't know. I feel like after losing Bowden, God really pulled back the curtain, and he let me see some things, and he let me know how much he was using Bowden's life to impact others. And I feel like God did that because he's so merciful and gracious. He did that because he knew I needed it. With the NICU, I don't know. I don't know what seeds I planted. I don't know what impact they made. I just know that while I was there, I was going to try my best to share about Jesus. And so that time period felt similar in the fact that I was going through another traumatic event, but there was less stillness in that season. And it was more of just like constant on the go I felt like I was in survival mode between the NICU and mothering Noah. But I tried my best to share the gospel when I could.
Thank you for sharing about that time. I remember praying so often, and even just the specific requests. I think we were all really grateful to know how we can specifically pray for you in the day to day, because like you said, when you're in Groundhog Day, it's really hard to feel like you're seeing the Lord do specific things. You know that you're moving in a general trajectory to hopefully bring your baby home, but to just have that reminder that you have a community behind you that's praying, and you have an opportunity to share the word with the people you're interacting with and pray over these babies is so beautiful. What an amazing perspective that you had during that time. And you've shared with us a lot of different things during this entire interview. One question that I have for you is how you would encourage a parent who's listening to this episode and maybe can relate to any part of your story. What's something that you would say to encourage them?
I would say, even if you don't feel it, God is in it with you. And I did not really feel God all the time in the NICU. And part of that was there was a lot less margin. I was truly running ragged in that season. Truly was. For a good month, I just felt like I was living minute by minute and running from thing to thing. And I didn't have the margin or the space to pray to God for an hour every single day. I just didn't have it. So I would just send up bullet prayers, like constantly, like, Jesus help me. God, hey, like let's have a good feed. That's all I could do. And I was okay with that. And I didn't really always feel him. And that wasn't because God wasn't there. That was because I was truly in a storm. And there are moments when that was hard for me. There are moments when I was like, God, where are you? And then I'd have to go back and say, God is in it with me. God is right here. It's just, there's a lot going on right now. And, not even taking into fact that I was going through the hormonal postpartum thing, like there was a lot going on. So just remembering God is in it with me. So even if you're in a storm, whatever you're dealing with, and you might not feel God, just remember God is in it with you. And I do think sometimes it's easier to look back. it's easier to look back and see in hindsight and see, oh, he was there with me in that moment. I just maybe didn't really recognize it, but he is carrying me through the storm. And seek his word. Truly, I think seek his word and don't draw away from him.
Hmm. What incredible encouragement and words that you have. And I have just had such a privilege of walking this through with you so closely, with honesty and prayerfully. I remember being able to hold Isla for the first time and just being like, I prayed so much for you. And what a beautiful moment. I mean, as a friend I've got to have through Isla, and just your testimony is incredible. I just appreciate it. And I'm so encouraged by you and your strength and your faith that has grown from the day that I heard that you had lost Bowden to now. It is night and day of your faith. And it's encouraging and beautiful. And I just am a loss for words. I'm so thankful for your testimony and who you are through this.
Well, I feel like God used both of you. I mean, both of you to just really carry me through it. He put that village around me. So, I
He
mean,
really
Megan, you brought me, Megan, Noah still talks about the chocolate stack cake you brought us. Megan brought us a wonderful meal when we really needed it. And Noah still talks about that chocolate snack cake you brought us. And it brought us so much joy.
I'll send
You
you the
also got me
recipe after.
it was so good. She also sent me a really wonderful devotional. But for Noah, it was the snack cake that was really impactful. So
Of course. Snacks are the way to toddlers'
Amazing.
hearts.
yeah.
But a question that we love to ask every single person that is on our podcast is, how are you learning or have learned to surrender like Sarah?
I'm going to keep this short because we've talked about a lot. But just to kind of quickly summarize it, once you get out of the NICU journey is not over. And that's something I'm still learning. Isla is 4 months old today.
Yay.
So, which is crazy because she's 4 months old, but she is really more like a 2.5 month old with her adjusted age. So she's still like a teeny tiny little chick. And she is strong. She fights hard. But the hardest thing for her, which is why she was in the NICU so long, is her feeding. It just is. And before I was a mom, I did not realize that feeding a baby is such a consuming aspect of having a baby. But I don't know what I thought before, but it is. And her feeding has been pretty challenging. I really, really wanted to just exclusively breastfeed her because I do find pumping to be a lot. With her being in the NICU, it was hard. And I specifically prayed to God and I said, God, I cannot keep doing this anymore. I was really running myself ragged trying to breastfeed, pump, bottle feed. We were having to fortify a formula. I mean, we were literally doing everything. And on top of that, I'm trying to mother Noah. And I wanted God's answer to be, you could exclusively breastfeed her and make this super easy. Like I wanted that to be God's answer.
Mhm.
And I went to a doctor's appointment and after a few things realized she was falling off her growth curve. And I came to the realization I just needed to take everything off my plate and just pump bottles for Isla, give her bottles, make it easy for her and move on. And I just like I asked God to help me with the whole feeding journey for Isla, and I wanted him to answer in a certain way, and he answered, and it wasn't the way I wanted him to answer, which often happens to us. But I surrendered it to God. I said, okay, God, okay. And I gave it to God. And I said, I asked for you to answer my prayer. You answered it, not how I wanted. But since totally giving that to God and just letting go, things have been so much easier. So, and she's gaining weight. I'm having more time with Noah. Yes, it's like not it's not enjoyable, but it's better for our family as a whole. And God truly knows what we need. So I did that probably the last 4 weeks. I truly just gave it to God and have felt the positive impacts since already surrendering that to Him.
Praise God. Thank you so much for sharing, Jackie. And we are just so grateful that you said yes to be on our podcast. Grateful for your vulnerability, your willingness to share everything, these really small details that point us back to the Lord. And ultimately, thank you for pointing us to God and His character, His word in the midst of tragedy and pain, and now also in the midst of miracle. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes, we're so thankful. And I'm gleaning so much from you consistently as a friend. And I'm just so thankful that other people can hear your story as well.